Welcome back to the WeMaple video show. Today we're joined with a friend of mine, David Burns. We were on the phone last night and we had an opening on the show. David lives in Calgary and zipped his way on over here. Welcome back. Thanks, David.
Anytime, Matt. Good to see you.
You too. I've known you many years and I think I have you as Dave in my phone, but sometimes David, do you have a preference?
Not really. Though you don't call me Ray, that's fine. We've known each other, about 6 years now?
Yeah, we met at an ayahuasca ceremony.
Yeah, we did a while back. And what do you want to talk about? How would you like to approach this?
Well, that ceremony was, that was my first ceremony and the best ceremony. They've gone downhill since. What's your experience with the plant medicines been?
Well, I don't want to... We're living in a time where everybody's looking for solutions to things. And I think a lot of times people, when they go to these types of events, they're looking to kind of raise the bar on who they are and what they're doing, which is a natural reflex maybe, especially if you're under pressure or you're experiencing things that aren't going the way you want them to. But I think even as we were chatting last night, a lot of the times, just because you do a lot of those ceremonies doesn't mean your life necessarily improves in different ways, right? And there can be a lot of, everybody thinks they're a shaman, everybody thinks they're a holy person, everybody thinks they're maybe more spiritual than they are. They're great for being around people who are maybe like-minded and don't approach the world the way most other people approach the world, and the whole community while you're in that space is great. But I sometimes wonder if the benefits are overplayed a bit. And, the spirituality that people are looking for isn't always there. So interesting experience to go through. Like I say, I met great people like you. But I'm kind of at the point where I'm kind of stepping back from all that stuff a little bit, just to see what other things life has to offer. I was thinking in terms of what we could talk about, the state of the world today. Why do people feel as stressed out as they do? Why are, they jumping around looking for solutions to problems? And it does seem to me that, perhaps our biggest issue is our deference to authority. I met a guy who lived in from Romania, and he went back to visit Romania a little while ago. And he and I have always talked about, what's going on in the world and the pressures and the economy and governments and what they're all doing and this and that. And he was telling me that when he was home for his vacation in Romania, they're way more free there than we are. They don't make as much money, but they've got big orchards and they've got big gardens and everybody knows how to raise food and everybody's looking out for each other. And he figured most people didn't buy the government line about the sickness and this and that there was a lot of, sidestepping that whole thing. And he says he comes back here and he says, we think we're prosperous and we think we're free, but in many ways, we're impoverished the way things work. I've got another friend of mine who drives Uber, and he picks up a lot of people who have come to this country from other places. And they're just blown away by how hard it is to make ends meet here, and they don't understand how people can do it. And I think my own personal opinion is we've had it so good here for so long that we don't appreciate that you can lose that. We don't appreciate that a lot of those things that built the culture up can just as easily be dismantled. I find it ironic, for example, that for 40 years this province the premier was a man of God, a minister for all intents and purposes, and now we're dragging ministers out of their churches if they run church services for people, and they're still, I think Pulowski, for I think he's still got charges against him. I think he's, a lot of charges were dropped in BC for any of the COVID violations, but I think he's still got to face, potential prison time for being a man of God. And I was listening on the way over here about this guy who's involved in disaster relief, and he's involved in watching supply chains and all those kinds of things. And he was talking about how churches are sort of a fundamental building block that you can use locally to support the community, and people are getting together to kind of help each other out and make their lives better, getting back to the spiritual aspect of some of that stuff. And how the government hates that. They don't want you going to churches to kind of sidestep what they're imposing. They want you to go to the government.
Government is God, is what they would want.
God.
Now, how do you define for you God?
That's a pretty truth. You know the truth when you hear it. And you were talking about your gut level feelings about whether something is true or not. That could be a calling from the divine if you want. For me, it's a compass that I don't always follow as closely as I could, right? But that's what I would describe God as the kind of underlying truth of reality that you violate at your peril, right? And I think that's what you see lately nowadays with government imposing all this stuff on people. They're trying to become God, right? They're going to try to become the last line of defense for people. And the challenge we face there is that there's this guy there's this guy who did experiments. I can't remember his exact name. It starts with an M, but they were famous after World War II, where they say, oh, the Germans were horrible people, what they did, we wouldn't do that. In our culture, we would never have anything to do that. But they did this experiment where they got people off the street to sit at a desk with a dial, and an actor was behind a screen. And the actor, so what they told the test experiment is if this guy gave a wrong answer to a question, you electrocute him. And then as he got more and more questions wrong, you raise the level of the voltage, right? And they found it was really easy to get people to go all the way to the point where they were literally killing somebody in their minds. It was an actor behind the screen, so there was nobody actually dying. But the test subject would increase the dial right up to the point where the guy was quiet behind the screen, and they did another experiment. They've done other experiments where you get a whole room full of people.
Before you tell me, before you share with us the second experiment, what do you think the biggest lesson is about human nature in the first experiment you just described?
Well, it's that we all want to be part of the herd. And that for a lot of people, if they're given direction from somebody who's an authority, they're going to take it. And it's a very powerful force that if you think about it in biological terms, if you're not part of the herd, you don't get fed, you don't breed, there's a lot of things at a very biological level.
Yeah, it's a visceral human, like it's beyond thought. It's just in your, like birds flock together. There's that other experiment where they had a ding sound in a waiting room of a doctor's office, and it was all actors except for the person walking in, and they'd ding, and then everyone would stand up, and then someone would walk in, and the people would then be kind of confused. Why is everyone standing up? But then after 3 or 4 times, they got trained to then stand up with everybody else, even though it made no logical sense.
Yeah.
They just went along with it.
Yeah.
So that's what that first experiment reminds me of. You were about to share a second.
Well, it was the same sort of thing. You get a room full of people, and one guy's a test subject, and the rest of them are actors. And they are told something that's blatantly false, but they all agree that it's true. And before you know it, the person in the room is agreeing with them as well. It's green, but everybody says it's blue. And eventually the test subject says, it's blue.
That's interesting because that kind of moves from this idea of visceral into logical or cognitive because you're almost questioning your own sanity at that point. It's almost like a psychological. You're like, what? It's red. It's clearly red, but everyone's saying it's blue, and you're like, well, I guess if everyone else says it's blue, then it is, even though you feel like you believe that it's red.
And it may not even be that they're questioning their sanity. They're just doing what everybody else is doing, and it's not even a question, right? And at a base level like that, it looks obvious that there's something amiss, right? But on a broader scale, there might be all kinds of things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis that in reality make no sense at all, but everybody just goes along.
Well, and that's back to that idea that you're saying around truth, because if fundamentally you do believe, then you're compromising like in that second example, you'd be compromising your own integrity and your own truth to then just go along with the herd.
But it's like, which one is the more dangerous to take on?
Right, like the confronting nature of everyone judging you versus just
going against the herd and all that implies, or sticking with your truth. Now, I would argue that once you are confronted with the truth of something, you can't easily walk away from it, right? Like once you get hit with something that's so that, and I don't know what that means for different things for different people, but once you're confronted with the truth, you can't deny it anymore, and you can't step back from it and say, no, you guys, like, and I think that's part of this quote unquote awakening that's going on, which, all those other activities that we talked about before, the spiritual side, the political side, all the rest of it, start to manifest in a whole bunch of different ways. But like I say, I think in our neck of the woods, we're still fairly early on in that process because we've had it. We've still got grocery stores full of food. We've still got, supposed freedom. It's getting scary when the government can come in and shut down your bank accounts and stuff like that. And, with this digital currency that they say, will be introduced fairly soon here, that could lead to a whole bunch of things changing overnight. But, the long and the short of it is, once you've sort of been confronted with something that you absolutely can't deny, it's almost impossible to go back.
That 100%. And that's what I got in that first ceremony. To me, it became so undeniable that there's beings, energies, frequencies. Someone said an analogy once that, your mind is like an AM/FM kind of radio tuned into a particular signal, and when you're turning that dial, and these plant medicines turn you into a frequency that you connect in other worlds or dimensions or whatever language you want to use to describe it. Pardon me, but that first ayahuasca ceremony, to me, I tuned into something, and I had a knowing in my heart and in my gut, beyond anything that I'd ever experienced, that there's other things going on that I don't understand, but I now know with my intuition and soul that they're real and they're there. And so that eventually, for my journey, led to an undeniable, Krishna, creator, source, infinite intelligence, whatever word, I call that God, this connection that I have to something greater than myself. And for God has opened up amazing things for my kids to be a part of a community in a traditional Christian way, and what they get in Sunday school, and these fundamental values that the church carries forth, which in a way is in direct opposite to government. And so I would see why government has pushed that needle so far. We don't know how to grow our own food. We don't sit down and have family supper. We don't often, families have a lot of love and connection and hugs and these things that are just fundamental to family. The government has come in and put technology in the way of all of that. And so we're ending off on this digital currency piece. What concerns me about that future is if that is so severed at a family unit that the kids are now grow up with their teachers, and now AI comes in and does the thinking for the future. Like I if I didn't already have kids, I would think good and hard about bringing them into the world that we're going towards.
And yet, the only way the human race continues one way or another is if you bring kids in the world.
Well, now you can cook them in an easy bake oven in your living room.
That's they don't call it artificial for nothing, right? And
then what is that consciousness? Because they do have these. You still need the insemination to happen, but then you can take the egg, zygote, or whatever it's called, the infertilized egg, and take it out of the woman's uterus and put it in a plastic oven and cook your baby like the way you'd bake a loaf of bread in your living room. And so
that's beyond my pay grade.
I'd be curious then, with the consciousness and a soul, taking the case that consciousness is real and we're having an experience, taking the case that that's real and that there's a soul, that you're a person. What I don't understand then is where does that come from? Because if it's sperm goes into an egg, fertilizes an egg, and then a person emerges, at what point does that person get a soul and a consciousness?
Yeah, I can't answer that.
Next episode.
Well, next episode. Yeah, maybe, give me a little time to do some research.
I have,
if you want to get way out there, you hear about cloning all the time, and you hear, and if what you're describing is true, then it makes sense that potentially you could reproduce that process and reproduce that person, on an ongoing basis. And you've heard it said that all those clones don't have a soul. And they don't live like humans. They maybe last a few years, but then kind of burn themselves out over time. And, it's not inconceivable that there are technologies that can do this that are way beyond our even imaginations about what's possible.
That's the U.S. military's main thing. Anything that the public sees is actually decades advanced. That even
Absolutely.
The phone that we have and let's throw them Chat GPT. Like, let's give Chat GPT to the public. Imagine what they really have going on as far as what the computers are capable of.
Yeah, and yes, and other technologies. I mean, you still got to live in that. Still got to live in this world. You shouldn't maybe worry about other souls as much as worry about your own.
100%.
And like I say, that's where the decisions come in about what's important and what isn't, and what's true and what isn't, and it's where, I was listening to a guy, Martin Armstrong. I don't know if you know Martin Armstrong. He's an international forecaster. He's developed a software called Socrates, and basically it predicts almost to the day when certain economic events are going to happen. And it's very interesting stuff. You'd be well-versed to look him up and look into what he talks about. He's met all world leaders. He gets pulled into anytime there's a currency crisis or anything like that, he gets pulled in to talk to world leaders about what to do. They almost never do it, because they want to kind of push the problem down the road for the next guy to deal with. But he says these guys who are going to try to impose the global currency are going to fail, but they are going to impose it for a while. And he says 2032, all these forms of government that we currently have are going to disappear, and it's going to be replaced by something hopefully a little healthier, right? But we got to get through 2032, and he says we got to go through all these hard times to come out the other end, right? And but how do you make a pearl, right? You get a little bit of sand in a shell, and you kind of put a little pressure on it, and that's how you get this beautiful thing out the other end. Maybe this is just, the natural process we're all involved in, right?
Yeah. Have you heard that kind of old adage? Hard times make strong men make good times make weak men. And the way that you just described that, like, because if we go back, say, 100 years, most of us that identify as Canadian were really not from here. Our parents, for the most part, if we're Caucasian, immigrated from some part of Europe. And that was difficult and just took courage, and bravery. I have no idea what to expect. I'm going to just sail across the world and see what happens. And these people that built the railroad, these incredible. Canada achieved a lot in 100 years, and that took grit and it took courage and bravery. And then now look what, with what we're seeing in masculinity of young men. We used to run off of boats into battle, into certain death. Now there's just like, here, put this on, cover up your face, young man. And just this complete shift in masculinity. It's astounding.
Yes. Having said that, running off a boat into sudden death necessarily wasn't the smartest thing to do either.
100%. But try get high school students to go and script in the military these days.
The other thing I might throw around too is the idea that, there was a population here before the Europeans came.
Oh, you mean our indigenous?
Our indigenous population. And for all intents and purposes, there was a wealth transfer that took all of what they had. And, these new people came in and kind of took it over. And now we're kind of going through the same thing where we have a whole influx of people being encouraged to come here. And they're supported, on a number of levels by government. And the indigenous population now, being us, I suppose, is watching our standard of living fall. And it's the same forces, that were 100 years ago promoting the first wave of immigration, if you would, 100, 150 years ago. Now, I would argue it's those same forces that are encouraging another wave of immigration, precisely because it's useful geopolitically to kind of maintain the balance of power, right?
Yeah, you've used the word forces a couple of times, and through language, Star Wars, the Force, right? There's an energy. Forces, it could also mean a particular group of individuals if we put it in the context of unelected officials that are controlling our academic or all levels of government, including finance. So when you say forces, what does that mean to you?
Well, let me put it to you this way. I find it fascinating how quickly you can get whole groups of people to adopt certain ideas. You would have thought with all the changes that we've gone through, whether it's transgender stuff or whether... I heard, for example, in Calgary, a girl who went to high school went to her library and half the books in the library were gone. So anything that was produced after 2008 now has been removed from the library. So it's amazing that you can find whole institutions that adopt new kind of dictates, if you will, as quickly as they do. So and even if you look at the transgender population as a population, it's very small, less than 1%, maybe even 0.5% of the total population. So how is it that all of a sudden now this is so strongly promoted through the schools, through, somebody wants that kind of information communicated to people the way it's being communicated to people. And maybe it's deferring to authority again because, most people are dependent on whatever they're doing to support themselves. That, okay, if I don't support them, it's, I know it's not true, but hey, I'm going to starve on the streets. So I'm just going to do what I'm told, right? So that force, if you will, or that entity or whatever is kind of pushing what's going on in the background, very clearly has some influence. And I would think really what it is, it's not force, it's commerce. It's basically money. It's basically the way our, the whole system is set up where, if you run, it's I think Rothschild said, if I own the money, I don't really care who runs the country.
Or there's another thing that if you control the youth and the next generation, that you can control the country.
Well, absolutely. Absolutely.
You control the minds of the young, then you can control the country and within a generation. And, in a global context, that, what we see in China and the way that they've executed on their digital currency system, this money expires. they ran the tests. And so people are paid in a digital cryptocurrency that has an expiration date. And so that's peculiar. And then if we match that with what is publicly on the World Economic Forum website, that in 2030 you'll own nothing and be happy. And there's a way now to do that. And that's what's concerning to me about this global, things that are happening in lockstep or simultaneously, is that if we take the case that what they're telling us is true and they now have a way to do it, it's like, well, why did communism fail in other places? Well, I don't know. But here's now a global system of enslavement that is now your money's controlled and expires and goes away. What, you can't save money anymore to buy a house? Your money just will, if you don't use it within 2 weeks, it's gone. And this money, you can only spend this much on gas and this much on food and this much on water. Like, if that system comes online, which we're told it's going to, that is concerning, because it takes what was formerly communism and slavery to a whole other place. You eat this, you do this, you stay here, you don't go there. And if you do, we'll shut your money off. And if you try to do this, we'll block you out of the system. Downtown, some buildings now, you wave your hand in front of a sensor to have the door open. So, they back to this, biblical and spiritual context, this idea of a mark. If, there's something then in your wrist, like, I love the idea of being connected to my phone and my brain. Like, that actually to me is exciting. I think certain parts of technology will be great. When my mind's on Google, at any moment I could find any information about anything. If I had ChatGPT in my mind, imagine what I could achieve as an entrepreneur, as a father. If I had access to all information, I could speak every language. That's exciting. If my brain is online and connected to the internet, I would sign up and put something in my body to do that, if I knew with certainty that it wasn't going to then cross another boundary. Because where's that line now that we talk about frequencies, where your thoughts are being influenced, your emotions are being influenced, your behavior is being influenced, to the point of you don't even know that you're you anymore. That could go that far.
That could happen. And more to the point, how do you know, even if you're connected to ChatGPT or everything else, that you're getting good information? I know Jordan Peterson, he was talking about his experiences with ChatGPT, and he asked the ChatGPT to give him some information on a subject, mythological subject, whatever. And the ChatGPT gave him the information back, but it also chastised him and said, this stuff isn't really politically correct, if I remember the story right. And so maybe you shouldn't be exploring this stuff, right? And I think he replied to it saying, look, I'm an academic and I asked you for information. I don't need you to judge me for what I'm doing. So that was one example of ChatGPT giving him, kind of lecturing him on what he was looking at. But the other was ChatGPT gave him false information. He went and looked for something, and ChatGPT gave him some false information, and he had to correct it and say, look, this is incorrect, right? And so it's so
that's where that is another layer, and it's all dread and concern here on my side. But I've just been thinking a lot about my kids in the school system. But you mentioned the books, right? Is like, it wasn't that long ago that human beings took all the books and burned them. And so if we take the case that books will phase out and tablets and digital information will replace books, then where is that line that we're actually going to know what history is? Because within a generation, if we just reteach the youth what happened, like, I went to school and I learned that John Cabot founded Canada, and we were all friendly with the native population, we traded things from Europe and with them, and we were all friendly and signed the treaties. But no, what really happened is we gave them diseased blankets and said, sign these treaties or otherwise we're not going to give you the medicine to cure your tribe. And
alcohol.
And alcohol. And it wasn't in their genetics to have alcohol, so it had a tremendously negative impact, versus it's been in the European bloodlines for so many hundreds of years. We had wine.
Yeah.
So our genetics were adapted, but it just destroyed. But that's a whole other piece. But so just back to this point, though, around truth and what's true, is that if books end up gone and an AI-led digital information is how people are taught and what we know about history, then, like, who's in control of that? And if it gets away on its own, then that's even more horrifying.
Might encourage you to go to garage sales and buy books, eh? And just tuck them aside. Right?
Yeah.
They could become, pretty valuable down the road. But you're absolutely right. I mean, and then, artificial intelligence, how do you know if anything's true? Because, they're getting to the point where they can make video. I got a buddy of mine who was playing with Chat GPT to create, he types in a criteria and it comes back with this amazing artwork that shows exactly what he was looking for, right? And didn't I hear there was some contestant for the Junos that submitted a song and it was done by artificial intelligence, so they actually took it out of the competition because it wasn't done by a human being, right? I don't that you might need to check on that, but somebody was telling me yesterday about how there was a song submitted that was done by artificial intelligence that was nominated for a Juno, but then they found out it wasn't done by a human, it was done by artificial intelligence.
I would imagine that is true.
Pulled it out of the competition.
With everything in Hollywood now that's happening with the writers, and it's no surprise that level of creativity has even it's indistinguishable from what a human being made, and sometimes better. We had a client issue where our client was in the press on a radio show, and they mispronounced, the host of the radio show mispronounced the name of the client twice, and then we ran it through an AI tool and then recreated the interview with it being stated in the correct pronunciation. And so the AI took that voice of that interview person, and then we got it said the right way, and you can't even tell the difference.
Beautiful.
And so now, and not now, but even going back, what's that influence on politics, right? How do we know that the faces and the videos and the things that we're seeing are even human beings and not already AI generated?
Well, it shows, with the right tools, we could do a lot for everybody, right? We got a lot of people struggling, I know riding around town, there's a lot of homeless here and there. And then that's another thing. They had a city council meeting downtown on the weekend. I don't know if you heard about it, but
the one about what's going on in the rental market. Yeah. Well, it is an emergency if you're talking about people and affordability.
But you know what they're going to use it for? So they create an emergency and they use it to rewrite all the rules.
Yeah, problem, reaction, solution. What do they call it? What's it called? Hungarian dialect or
Hegelian dialect.
Hegelian dialect. Problem, reaction, solution.
And plus we've got this authority problem in our neck of the woods potentially that allows people to, to just go along with whatever's decided by a handful of people that influences, a million and a half, right? So, but again, so again, it's tricky, and maybe people are going to have to suffer before they get to the point where they say, okay, this just is not working, and we got to do something about this. I was telling you about an Take Back Alberta meeting I went to, and they were talking about how the volunteer levels of people in politics is incredibly low, that you don't get people showing up to help with political campaigns. You get very few people voting. And so, they're trying to reverse that by encouraging people to volunteer for the school board, volunteer for city boards, volunteer at the constituency level, get involved in these things so that you have the ability to influence what's going on. And I thought that was really quite clever. They instead of finding a splinter party where you can, be the big wheel in the room with your concerns, but never do anything. Look at the People's Party of Canada. Max Bernier, met him, great guy, but he's got so many forces stacked against him, it's unlikely he'll ever really have any major influence. Unless something absolutely explodes, right, and changes everything. But if you can get, and just like the churches, it seems like the more you can do locally, let's face it, the city politicians are all here in town, so you can phone them, you can get in touch with them, you can put pressure on them that way. Likewise, provincial politicians are only a few hours away up in Edmonton, right? And, if you can get in front of them and you can let them know what's going on federally, it's forget it. You see the guy once every few years when it's election time, and then everybody votes on party lines, right? And And that might be another reason to let the whole country break up. That might be a reason to kind of let things kind of break down a bit so that you can take care of your region. You can take care of what you've got in your backyard. You're not trying to do it on a national and then international level, right? But are people willing to kind of do the work? Are people really willing to kind of step up and be counted? It's hard to say.
The time and money, right? Like, what's the payoff in that? If you're a parent and you were working full time, you really care about time and money. Like, you want to spend time with your kids. You got to, so like carving out that extra time and then not be able to see a change. Like, I could see how more people would be not participating in what you're describing than participating, just because it's hard.
Yeah. But the payoff, might be a better life for your kids. And are you willing to kind of put the time in now so that they have something later? And, money's kind of ephemeral, isn't it? We talk about going to a digital currency, but in many ways we're already there. I mean, most people rate their level of wealth by what they see on their computer screen. They don't actually have it buried in their backyard or, stored up in, a box under the bed.
Do you have any money buried somewhere? What are the coordinates?
I wouldn't answer that question one way or the other, but I would encourage people.
You got the lotto ticket on the fridge like Walter White with the GPS or what?
Certainly encourage people to have some money outside of the bank, right? Because, if all of a sudden, if something happens, it's going to happen very suddenly. And if something happens, you want to have some money to kind of keep going until whatever, Cyprus. Look at what happened to Cyprus. There was a woman I heard who, in Cyprus, who used to go to the bank every Friday, and she used to take all her money out of the bank on Friday. And then every Monday she used to go back and deposit it again. And so they finally asked her, why are you doing this? Why do you take your money out on Friday? And she said, because if there's going to be a bank holiday, it's going to happen on a weekend. So by taking it out on Friday, she's got it in her back pocket. And then on Monday, if everything's fine, she can deposit it back in the bank again, right? So like I say, money is something we've been sort of conditioned to chase for sure. And it's sure uncomfortable when you don't have any. I'm not going to deny that. And, but it's also what's kind of led us into where we're at and what, why we're stuck where we're stuck, right? Is people are more concerned with, chasing money than making sure their communities are healthy, making sure their politics is sound, and making sure, their voices.
Well, it's back to that value set, is like we've just been conditioned to value different things that are as far away from church or God or family unit as possible. And not to say every family is like that, but just a lot of the majority of people are focused on those things and not those other pieces.
Yeah.
Have you had an experience yet with your debit card or credit card where like the tap hasn't been working as frequent?
I don't do tap just because for me, tap's too bizarre, to just wave your card.
So do you always put in from user PIV?
Type my code in and I carry cash around. I like paying people with cash just to see, I haven't run into too many places in Cal. I still encourage people to pay for cash, because then if you got more circulating, it's harder.
100%. That's like, a lot of people are still using it, so we can't get rid of it.
Yeah,
but yeah,
keep it,
because they eliminated the penny, right?
Eliminated the penny, and that's inflation, and that's the other thing. The money is quickly with inflation buying less and less and less.
Yeah, go buy cream cheese. I was just on the Superstore thing ordering groceries last night, and I'm like, holy, like this is the price of dairy products now. Like,
yeah,
and I'd been for many months sort of seeing it, but it just struck me yesterday of like, it just seems like it's almost literally double for some things.
Yeah.
And you were talking before about like slowly things not being available. I noticed a lot of different foods just not available.
Yeah.
Certain breads. And maybe one thing that was different is I ordered groceries on a Sunday. So maybe because the weekend stock had been lower versus maybe ordering on a Tuesday or Wednesday is possible. There is a trend though that I'm seeing over the last year.
Processing.
Yeah, what's up with all those fires on the fruit and who bought all that farmland down in the U.S.? Who's the largest owner of? Bill Gates is the largest.
Here, Bill Gates wants to cut down 70 million acres of trees.
Yeah, bury them in the ground because it's climate change. Sounds smart when trees are the thing that takes CO2 out of the air.
And here's an example. You've got all these carbon capture plants that pull carbon out of the air and sequester it into the ground. But if you wanted to make the planet more green, you want more carbon dioxide. There's lots of scientific evidence that shows the way to make the planet more green is to produce more carbon dioxide. And when you think that we're carbon, the war on carbon is literally the war against us, right? It's the war.
Do you know the percentage of we're carbon-based life forms? Do you know the percentage of carbon that we are? Whatever, 90% water, right? Or is it 98% water?
Because I'm not well versed on how much carbon we are, but and I'm probably more than you, being old.
Yeah. Have you ever heard that if you get hit by a train that you turn into liquid?
I have not heard that, but
because that force of a freight train, because we're so much that it turns you just liquid. I don't know that to be true, but I heard it and I thought it was interesting to look into. You reminded me of so many things in what you just shared. One is it'd be an interesting experiment to go down to the bank and just ask for $20,000 cash and see what they say.
You'd never get it. And I know people in the States are going in to try to take out large amounts of money to buy a car, say. So they need $10,000 or whatever. And they hum and haw, and they tell you, well, it takes a while for us to pull that together. You've got to come back in a few days. I would bet you they don't even have 20 grand worth of bills in the bank at any given time. And you know what I mean? So that's why, if you take it out a little bit at a time, tuck it aside, that might, but yeah, it would be an interesting experiment.
Casinos probably got it, eh? A casino?
A lot of people are probably buying their chips digitally there too, don't you think? They're you heard about Vegas, eh, being shut down? And
oh yeah, I did hear that.
As hotels and so they were talking about how people, when they went to, they would play the slot machines, and if they won, they had to wait by the machine until somebody came with cash to pay them out for whatever they won on the slot machine.
Instead, didn't print the ticket that it would usually print?
No.
That's bizarre.
They had to literally sit by their machine until, so they won $40, they'd have to have some guy come by with $40 cash.
Sounds like what they do 100 years ago.
And there's the danger with electronic currency too. If you don't have proper paper cash, and all of a sudden something happens with the internet,
100%. That when
money, nobody's got any money.
This idea of slow boiling of the frog or conditioning to put up with, or to the fact that one of the largest carriers, cell phone carriers, shut off and there was no service for 30 hours or whatever it was a couple of years ago, is quite concerning. If they could, because if it's currency, that you need Wi-Fi, you need the internet too. Yeah. Not just that they'd shut it off because it would expire, but if the internet gets turned off, what are you going to do?
Well, and shipments would get disrupted. All of a sudden, you don't have stuff moving where it's supposed to move, and credit would get disrupted if you don't have the ability to kind of transfer funds back and forth, and you could have the whole culture collapse and kind of come to a standstill very quickly. And, there's only so much you can deal with, right? But that's why, take care of the home front, make sure that you're looking out for, immediate needs right away. Make sure you got a little bit of, go to the store, get a little extra because you're going to pay more for it anyway down the road. And maybe it's, maybe through what you're doing here could be a way to kind of communicate to people the urgency of what's going on in the world, and maybe encourage them to, step up a little bit, even if it's only half an hour a week, or, some period of time that they aren't going to be too pulled away from what they're up to. And maybe like I say, I read Buckminster Fuller said way back in the 50s that we could be living at a level 100 times more prosperous than we are right now. That the engineering and the technology already exists for us to be way, way more prosperous than we are right now. And we could be living, I've heard Africa could feed the planet. Africa is this impoverished nation, but they've got all the resources. They've got land, they've got the water. They could be feeding the planet, literally, right? And yet, look at what's happening in Niger. They're saying, look, you guys come and you take everything from our country and we're still impoverished. We're done with that. We're not doing that anymore, right? And there's your payoff. You could be a part of something that totally flips the whole planet on its ear, right? Buckminster Fuller talks about a trim tab, I think it's called. It's like a little rudder on the back of a boat, like a big boat, like a cruise liner or something, that before you turn the big blade, it's got this little blade that sort of starts the whole process going, right? And so this trim tab, concept, maybe you have to, we also know everybody in the world through 7 people, supposedly, right? So we don't know how much our influence could ricochet out to all kinds of different people that we couldn't have imagined through our own personal contacts and stuff, right? And I'm guilty of this as much as anybody. I like to complain about what I see, but it's often hard to know where to put your energies, right? So you wind up doing a lot less than you could, right? And now that I've got a little more free time to play with, I'm sort of curious about different ways I could be useful for here. And like you say, we're not here forever, so maybe some of the pleasures that don't always satisfy longer term, there's a lot of temptations, there's a lot of stuff that's thrown in front of us that keeps us distracted, eats up our time, puts poisons in our body, but it's absolutely delicious, right? They make these foods, they scientifically design these foods so they're literally addictive, I'm sure, on many levels, right? But if you could kind of make some changes and throw it out at the world, you never know how it could land with people in the longer run, right? And so that's sort of my take on things. Maybe it's a little disjointed right now. Maybe things aren't going exactly the way they could, but maybe that's what you need before you can deal with cancer. You got to acknowledge you have it, and maybe that's what we need to do, is see things get a little bit worse, so more people acknowledge that we got a problem and are willing to step in and say, okay, not anymore.
I like that idea of local level impact, but the step before that, when you talk about that rudder, for me, like, that's the family unit. That's the little mini rudder. There's pray, a plan, play, and working on, for my kids, these are the 3 things we focus on in our family: planning what we're going to do, having fun, and praying. And for me, that prayer, it got to me, that got so caught up in what religious context, whatever that is. But prayer and meditation for me is just that quiet moment where you express gratitude. You get into that state of being grateful for the things that you have. And like that simple act to understand that gratitude, like not just as a word, but to feel grateful. And so for me, that's what I do at the family level. And then, I love that idea of getting involved in the community. On, you're right that we can call up the people that are running City Hall, express concerns, ask questions. At a certain point, I think that politics, this idea of politicians, maybe forgot that they serve us, that they're here to serve us and make our lives better. The media is supposed to report on government for what they're up to, not be their talking point, funded, control the narrative piece. And so if citizens can get their family and their home right, and that's just my way, but do what's right for them at a home level, get that connection with their kids restored, and which has, I think, been severed in a lot of families due to technology and parents being busy with and time and money controlling everything from them, and then move out to that local level. And so, what advice would you say if a citizen is wanting to get out there and do something, make a change? What would you think that they could do or should do?
Well, find out what your strengths are. Find out where you got something maybe that you're good at and interested in, and see where that could be useful.
And so when you were saying that you've retired from your career, a long career that you've had, a successful career, how do you what would you say are your skills?
Well, communicating ideas. I mean, that was something I had to do every day on a long-term basis, communicate the value of what is being proposed.
Was it a sales?
It was a sales, business development.
And so you've got a tangible skill, call it sales or communication. Then what are you passionate about these days?
Well, I'm passionate about my family, of course. I'd like to see them kind of get to a point where, they're secure, which is tricky nowadays because it is so challenging for young people, I think. I'm passionate about what I see going on in the world in terms of what I don't like. I've been passionate about that for a long time, though. And, what else? I'm passionate, I like this part of the world. I'd love to go to a place with a nice beach and, there's that temptation to just say to hell with it. Go to a nice place and enjoy your life and kind of, but I don't know that would ultimately be satisfying either. I think you'd find after a while, if you weren't living with purpose, and to be honest with you, I'm trying to work through what my purpose is right now. I'm trying to work through where I could be the most valuable, both to myself and to other people.
What's that process of discovery? What's working for you through that process of discovery?
A lot of kind of meditating on it, I suppose. I mean, just seeing what comes up. And, at one point, I had a place out in Sundre and I was thinking of moving out there and starting gardens and having chickens and kind of hanging. That dream got kind of waylaid, and I've sort of since stepped back from that.
Are you still
kind of a learning experience though, because, I don't think I was uniquely suited to be living in the country on my own all the time, and it might have led to bigger problems, right? Like health-wise. I know I was consuming a lot of the wrong foods out there, and it wasn't as easy a place to take care of yourself as being in town is, with more outlets for this and that. And plus the social, you talk about socially, if you don't have a network around you, that can shorten your life. They've shown that, people without a strong community around them don't necessarily live that long, right? So that's something else to consider. And so maybe, okay, you had your taste, you got a flavor for what it was like out here, and like you see, my buddy from Romania was saying, I used to think the same way. I used to think I need to buy a property and go out into the country and, fend for myself, do a little hunting and stuff like that. But now he feels if he needs to, he could hop on a plane and go to Romania, and everybody there lives fairly healthy and abundant in his definition of the word. So maybe maybe there are other places that I could go where I could live, I could contribute, I could do, whatever.
I was still playing.
Figuring it out. I haven't been. I'm going to start playing music again.
I wasn't going to say playing music. I was going to say, are you still playing with remote viewing?
I never really was very good at it. I do think there's something behind remote viewing, but I never was very good at it. I took some courses, but I never went home and started practicing, remote viewing.
We did Paul something.
Yeah.
Level 1 remote viewing. Did you get a certificate mailed to you?
I did 2 other courses. I went to one in, 2 other at his Vancouver Island retreat out there. I did the first level 1 and a second.
I was convinced that guy was an alien.
Well, I wasn't. It never occurred to me that he was an alien, but
What was his
Very
name?
nice
Do you
musician.
remember his name?
I don't.
But that was an interesting. Yeah, I'll look it out. And sorry, I called you an alien.
But he knew some interesting characters.
Yeah,
And there's a guy, Cliff High, who uses the internet language to kind of forecast future events. And his theory is that we're all psychic.
Paul Elder.
Paul Elder. Very good. Very good. Hi, Paul. I hope you can forgive me for... But anyway, Cliff High, he says, if you scrape the internet, you'll find key phrases that are being expressed, and they denote future events, right? Again, I don't know if this is true or not, but he says we're up for some big events, and we're going to go through some, like 9/11, if it was a 4 on a 10 scale, what's coming will be like a 13.
I think it's a fake alien invasion.
I don't know what it is.
Or a real alien invasion.
Well,
or not invasion, but I think it'll be...
They had that guy down in Mexico who was introducing those two bodies.
Yeah.
I haven't really read up on that much, but that shows, there... And of course, there's those museums in Peru where they've got the cone head guys who clearly don't have,
Like, what's in that cone? Do they have bigger brains or something? But back to this idea of remote viewing and our consciousness is, we were in that course together, and the facilitator was sharing that story where the RCMP stopped the tunnel. There was drugs being moved from the United States to British Columbia, and they put a halt to the tunnel, but the drug flow didn't stop, and they didn't understand why. They thought that the RCMP thought that they stopped the drugs flowing. So they went to this incredible facilitator who has this skill, is known to have a skill called remote viewing, and he was tasked with the only information, or very limited information, and was asked to go and remote view on some keywords or coordinates or a theme of whatever. And he went into his consciousness and into this process of remote viewing, and went back to the RCMP and had an image of a large tree of sorts. That's probably not exact, but say
floating in the water.
Floating in the water. And the RCMP went and started watching the coast, west coast, and saw a large Douglas fir tree slanted in the water, and it was very peculiar looking, and discovered that the cocaine was being moved in a Douglas fir off the west coast of British Columbia, and then stopped the flow of the drugs. And so when you're talking about a knowing, when that story was shared, to me it became undeniable that there's something there where your consciousness can leave your body. You can connect spiritually in some realm that I don't understand, or dimension, and there's something there. And this individual is compensated for helping stop the flow of drugs because he went and remote viewed and tapped into something spiritual and amazing and powerful. And so I'm really encouraged by the human race that we can access certain things that we maybe did more of in the past. If we look at these pyramids, or we look at human history, I think we had more powers that we don't necessarily understand, or we've forgotten, or they've been hidden. I don't know. But there's something really cool about human beings.
Yeah. We're made in the image of God. I've heard it argued that the reason, quote unquote, Satan hates us is because we're made in the image of God, whereas he's not. And he has a lot of influence over what goes on down here, but he's a creation as well. He's not the creator, right? And that's the thing, these things are great, but if you rely on them for all your information, is that maybe blocking you from experiencing other things?
What's the Apple logo?
It's like, I bite out of it.
It's almost like, and they talk about the scrolling mirrors, and it's like, are these things, evil? And if we take the case that artificial intelligence has no soul and it's the opposite of human beings, why'd they have a bite out of the apple as the logo?
It's, it goes pretty deep. It's like, everything at some level has a spiritual kind of spin to it, doesn't it? Right. And you kind of, and if you ignore it at your peril, right? Even atheists are religious to some degree because it's their belief that there's nothing, beyond us, right? So anyway, I mean, I to wrap it up, in a kind of nutshell, right? Like, things are not ideal right now. I don't think anyone would argue that, right? And we're working through a bunch of things that, need attention, but nobody knows how to deal with it because it's kind of coming from even outside the country. It's not just an Alberta problem. It's not just a Canada problem. It's not just a North America problem. It's like the West is kind of being bounced around right now. And it's, I think it's because they run the financial system as far as they can in its current form, and they need to find a way to kind of change the rules and keep them in charge, And like I say, bigger minds than mine have said they're not going to do it, but it's going to be rocky over the next while. It's going to be rocky for the next till 2032. So what is that? 8 years. That's a long time. I hope I'm around to see it. I'd be thrilled to see it, but I don't know if I'm going to be around that long because it could get pretty rough here and there. But
what about in the short term, Dave?
In the short term, this part of the world could be an example to all kinds of other locations about how to take back control. We got a lot of resources in this neck of the woods. We got water, we've got energy, we can grow food here, we've got a smart, hardworking population. And, for a long time, Alberta's kind of carried the country by the transfers, to the federal government to kind of run things, right? And, but we've also had it so good that everybody's kind of let somebody else do it. Maybe this is where I got to get involved. Maybe I got to kind of step up and throw my 2 cents. If for no other reason than if I don't think things are right, I have a responsibility to say so, right? If I don't, and I can't just complain about it. If you're not stepping in the ring, you're not really helping. If anything, you're letting things continue the way they are.
What does that look like for you on the court? Meaning, like, what are you going to do for Q4 here?
They did encourage at the at the Take Back Alberta meeting that people who are interested get a UPC membership and then sign up for the UPC general meeting, which is here in Calgary in November, where a lot of positions that the party takes will be voted on. And in their presentation, they talked about how they were instrumental in getting Kenny to step down. That even, they were gonna have a vote at the general meeting, but when Kenny saw the opposition to him, they canceled the meeting for safety considerations, and then they went even to mail-in ballots or whatever. But Kenny only got about 52% of the vote, so he decided without the support he had to step down. Right, so. That was, in my mind, kind of a demonstration of how the locals can take control of the ruling party and kind of get their MPs to, get MLAs to listen, right? And so that's one thing I can do, right? And, I could join some boards downtown because I don't really like how the city's being run. So maybe I get on some boards that way to kind of influence decisions that are being made at that level, right? So, I mean, that for me personally might be the first steps. I used to write a lot of music that talked about some of this stuff, and it was kind of ahead of its time. So maybe it's time to pull it back out again and use that as a way to influence people. And maybe I should be doing a podcast or helping somebody else do a podcast, right? So again, the censorship is pretty extreme nowadays, right? So, and since when are the censors the good guys? I've never really, I can't remember a culture where the censors were the good guys, right? But just by getting the message out there, maybe that'll be enough to inspire enough other people to kind of take a step in a new direction, right? And this is a great part of the world, like it still is a great part of the world. And so, I'm fourth generation here, right? So fourth generation, I had a great grandfather, who was an MP for Stavely for a few years way back when. And so, I got a stake in this part of the world. I can't really go back to any country or start over, So, maybe that's, I got the time, I got the interest, I know enough people that I can at least, and I do talk to people about what's going on, if for no other reason than to get them thinking about it. But maybe I got to get with like-minded people so that whatever you're doing is a little more effective.
Is there anything that you want to share as we wrap? Is there a place that you want people to find you or email you, or do you want us to check in 100 days?
Let's check in 100 days. Let's do this. Let's mark this as a challenge, and maybe there'll be. I don't have a website. I don't have emails, particularly that that I check enough to monitor that way. And this was just an opportunity to converse, right? I do believe that there's nothing more valuable than a good conversation. So if I can leave anything with anybody, I would encourage them to converse with people. And I would say that we're sort of losing the ability to talk to each other, because if you're not on the same page, too often people get defensive and they get upset and the whole conversation breaks down. But, by having a conversation with somebody, you get to listen to yourself talk about your ideas. You get feedback on those ideas from somebody else. And ideally, even if you can't agree on what's being discussed, at the end of the day, you both walk away with a richer context. And so the next time you're describing what your thoughts are to somebody else, it might be more refined, it might be more effective. And that's what I would say is we need to start, the whole COVID thing kind of shut down conversation on a whole bunch of levels, I felt. And we kind of lost our social connections a little bit. We're not as in touch with each other as we used to be. Everybody's cocooning a little bit. And we need to kind of break that and so maybe we need to reach out to each other a little more frequently in order to facilitate those conversations and do it, in the spirit of patience and love and not self-righteousness, right? Just try to get the conversation going for the sake of the conversation and not necessarily to change the world overnight. So that's what I would sort of encourage people to do per se. And then in 100 days, who knows, maybe we'll have more to converse about there. So
thank you, Dave. Thank you for that message. And I have one request, which is share this experience with a friend or colleague or someone who you think would be a great guest. Will you do that for us?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I have even maybe somebody in mind.
Right on. Thanks for joining us today, Dave.
Anytime.
Awesome.